Well, it's been a while since I did the video on the Minecraft server. Figured I should make the next one. A few people actually pressured me into making this one over the course of the year. I figured I finally ought to make it. This is the boat server video, the side server to the main 5-year server that the previous video was about. If you haven't watched that video yet, it's okay. It's over an hour long. I know people don't usually have the time for that, but all you really need to know is that we've somehow managed to turn Minecraft into a political unrest simulator. Take that as you will. Anyway, in this video I'll be going over the various ships that make up the Londivium fleet, the orders in which they were designed and built, and the various changes they faced or suffered over the span of the last 6 or 7 years now. Goodness me. Oh well. I'll be starting this off with the oldest ships first, which means we're going to have to start at a very humble, the first combat ships. We have the Gary Stonehenge and the Pillar of Valhalla. One of those is not my ships, but oh well. These two were created before we had the ability to save and load our ships. As a result, the only thing we could recover from them was their wreckage. They were a basis to how all of the other ships would be designed, as they all share the same basic outlook, or frame, if you will. A ship hull, and a canopy overhead. You'll notice, if you look at the ships in the background, the supply ships, that they all have this sort of canopy. Almost all of the ships have a look that is quite reminiscent of that. Anyway, these two ships were present in the Battle of the Sea. They were involved in the creation of the ship Boneyard. There was a fishing dispute between Londivium and Valhallan sailors, which turned violent. As a result, they strapped guns to their ships and sailed out to fight each other's. First naval combat the server had ever seen, and we were learning a lot of things back then. But they did their fighting, and I think ultimately the Londivium ship won, but looking at the wreckage, you can't really say anyone won. I think they both lost equally badly, but that is that's how that went down. I still wish I had a schematic of the old Stonehenge Mark 1, but oh well. Some things were never meant to be. Anyway, moving on, we have the successor line to the Mark 1, the Stonehenge Mark 2. We have the original Stonehenge Mark 2. As you can see, it was some sort of light patrol ship that is unusually heavily armored for a ship of its type. A lot of firepower, but very cheap construction. Now, you can see the successor versions to this version, the lighter and the even lighter, is just to cut costs of making this thing. The original has this weird stack of guns, which turns out to be very inefficient when attempting to shoot down other ships, so we turned that into a row of fire charge dispensers instead. But turns out we didn't need that either, and we shortened the amount down to about 6 on each side. And this is the final version of the Stonehenge Mark II. These are the most common ones as well. You'll see these a lot more than you'll see any of the other variants, but this thing has been involved in the defense of Area 50, which was a experimental ship construction yard, which also pushed out aircraft. It was captured by Valhallan forces, but they struggled to breach its defenses, thanks mostly due to this ship and similar types of its design. Lastly, of the Mark II types, we have the TNT-capable variant, which uses slime-based TNT launchers instead of a regular cannon, which you'll end up seeing sooner, hopefully, rather than later. But this was a very experimental class to try and push the ship up to more relevant current-day standards, featuring fire charge cannons as well as TNT launchers. The idea of this was it would be able to shoot over various ship defenses and damage them where they were weak. And in practice, it was surprisingly capable of doing that, but the slow rate of fire is what held this ship back. These TNT launchers are not particularly swift, nor do they do that much damage. They do, however, launch TNT at quite an awkward angle, which gives its own benefit, but there's also the fact that if you fired too fast with this thing, the slime-based TNT cannons would fire backwards into the ship itself, and that causes quite the obvious problem. But yeah, it's not really enough, and only a handful of these ships were made, fewer were fielded. And it's a bit of a shame though, because I thought it had a lot of potential earlier on, but using it proved less so. Lastly, we have the Stonehenge Mark III, the ultimate culmination of what the Stonehenge variants should have been. Has the weird gun stack that the first version of the Mark II has, but it also has the very, very high concentration of fire charge cannons at the front and back, because this thing was probably the most direct frontline ship that we have. It is designed to be pointed nose at the enemy and fire everything it has. As a result, the side cannons leave a little bit to be desired, if I've learned anything from the previous designs of the Mark II. There was a version of this ship that had standard FCGs, like being a line instead of these weird stacks, but unfortunately that one was destroyed before I was able to save it, and we only have this version to really count on. I could have rebuilt it, but I'd prefer it if it were a little bit more authentic than that, but oh well. There, that is that at the end of the day. Anyway, now we come to the greatest thing that I have ever built. This is the Monarch class of warships. This is the first true battleship that the server ever saw. This thing is ridiculously over-designed, and this thing came right after the Stonehenge Mark I was destroyed. So that thing over there, that very first ship, this is the second ship. Second one to be created, and it's this thing. I don't think I've ever topped this ship, and I don't think I ever will. This thing is still in active service. The other previous ships have a very weird relation with being used. Specifically, the TNT Mark II Stonehenge. It's not so commonly seen anymore. But this thing, ever since it was built, I have continued to use it, and I probably will continue to use it for very, very long time, as this thing has proven itself time and time again, even against vastly superior ships of superior design, superior capabilities. This thing has somehow almost always come out on top. I built this thing knowing how Minecraft works. I know that fire charges set fire to blocks, and I designed the entire ship around the idea that it's absolutely going to catch fire and burn. So I built complex fire break systems in between the ship to prevent the spread of fire between the front, middle, and aft parts of the ship. On top of this, to, shield these parts of the ship, because I don't really want them damaged, I included a shielding system to completely cover the entire ship, or most of the ship, to make it impervious to fire damage. And I hope I have this loaded, which I don't. But what this would do is it would dispense a layer of water around itself, completely covering itself, and naturally, fire cannot affect water. You cannot use fire charges to ignite any of these blocks if they're covered in water. And this worked flawlessly. However, there are some null bits in the front of the hull which did cause some issues, because the water wouldn't be able to flow in here. Thus, the front of the ship and some parts of the rear would still burn, but as a result of the fire break system, it was incredibly hard to take this thing down. The weakest part of the ship was ironically the giant, what's it called? Countermeasures. Countermeasure suite, that is the canopy of this ship, was if it caught fire, there was not really any way to put the fire out if it was not on top of the ship. If you did, you'd have to bore through the top of the inside of the ship and then find a way to climb up there, put the fires out. And if too much of it was burning, the ship was completely immobilized and you weren't able to move. But that very rarely happened, and even if the ship wasn't able to move, any damage that it did take, that the water shielding system did take as well, just cause the ship to become more resistant to damage, unless you chose to move. And this allows this that little quirk allows this ship to be incredibly durable. Okay, this thing has faced down TNT-capable battleships, which have were made. This thing faced down ships that were designed to destroy it specifically, and it came out on top multiple times. Though it is starting to show its age, and I wouldn't consider this thing a frontline battleship anymore. Back then it certainly was, but now I relegate this thing to more of a patrol or heavy scout ship instead of a frontline battleship. It's still probably one of the better ships that I've designed, and I'm very proud with how well it has performed. But even I recognize that this thing is showing its age. So I made the Mark II. The Monarch Mark II is a very, very light upgrade of the Mark I. All I think it does is have some slight interior design changes, like making some more redundant systems, so that if things are lost, the ship is still able to keep functioning. And that is all it is. That is all the Mark II is more complex inside design, and that is it. The Mark III is what the Mark II really should have been, as I made the Mark II in a bit of a rush. The Mark III has actual improvements, including improvements to the shielding and insides. It is just the added complexity of the Mark II with actually ability to actually use that added complexity to its benefit. It has extra redundancy, extra shielding, so even the weaker parts of the ship that weren't shielded in the previous versions, i.e. these cobblestone fire breaks, are also defended, because the Valhallan strategy for dealing with the Mark II and Mark I Monarchs was to target the unshielded parts of the ship, which were the fire break systems and various parts of the back of the ship, which they did. They did quite a lot. So I made this to counter that, and it does a good job. Now the easiest way into the ship is through the top, but Valhalla would ultimately create something that would comfortably and consistently counter this ship as well, which is a bit of a shame, but even then, this thing hasn't come... Okay, Valhalla made their own version of the Stonehenge Mark II TNT variant, which has a lot more launchers on the side of it at the cost of not having any fire charge guns, and that thing is the absolute bane of this ship's existence. But that ship wouldn't come into existence for a very long time. So for that entire time, this ship, the Monarch, and ships of its type were the absolute top dog. And I would like to say they still are, but hey, they really aren't. I've got a lot of ships that completely surpass it in all it can do. But anyway, that doesn't stop me from having I think this is the Mark V. It still has or Mark IV. Yeah, it's the Mark IV. For some reason it still has the Mark III sign on it. But again, this is minor improvements to the previous versions. This time it has automatic cannons on all sides, meaning you can flip one of these levers and just let it keep firing completely unattended. And then whilst it does that, you can attend to fixing any other parts of the ship that you need to. Just a little bit of extra automation to make the ship easier to use. And that is it. That is what it does. It is not very far changed from the previous version. I think that's why the Mark III label is still on it, but this is the Mark IV, not the Mark III. And the reason I said Mark V was I think I did try to make a Mark V, which included a TNT cannon in the front, but I never got round to making it. And oh well, we'll just maybe someday I'll put a note in that, and I'll get round to making it. But this ship is crammed. All of the interior design of this ship is a bit of a nightmare. Everything is crammed onto one layer of blocks, with some on a slightly elevated layer to survive water damage, because this ship has a flooding problem, which hilariously is not because of this hole in the floor, which is actually the way into the ship, by the way, but because of the... If I go underwater quickly, I'll be able to show you. It's because the floaters are actually a little bit higher on the ship than would be ideal. If the floaters were a little bit lower, that problem would be solved, but I haven't really touched the design of this ship beyond small interior changes. Regardless, it has certainly served its purpose, and I hope it'll continue to serve its purpose as probably the single best ship that I have ever built, and I doubt I will be able to top this thing in just... I like this thing. I'm not gonna hide it. I like this thing. I have used this ship probably more than I've used any other ship in this list, in this video, and yeah, even Valhalla has used this ship, and I think that's quite funny. Anyway, so moving on, we have the Wallhammer class. This was the first TNT-capable ship that I actually saved. The first actually TNT-capable ship would be the Heavy. Unfortunately, I didn't save the Heavy. And the Heavy was an airship, meaning it goes in the airships video, and I'm not going to really talk about it here. But this was the first TNT-capable ship, boat, that we have. And it has a face. It looks panicked. It looks afraid. And I don't really know how to feel about that. But yeah, there it is. This ship has earned the nickname the Meatloaf because it's chunky and very, very armored. But you might think, oh, it's got a lot of stone on it. This thing might be resistant to fire. No, it really isn't. These planks on the side and the back are the Achilles heel to this ship. It burns spectacularly easily, and putting the fire out on any part of this ship is nearly impossible because of the cobblestone frame that encases the entire thing. This thing wasn't the best design I've ever made, but it's not the worst design. And then it's also one of the few Londivium ships to have anti-air guns, which were a standard on Valhallan ships, but not necessarily Londivium ships. There were dedicated anti-air Londivium ships. This is also one of them. There was also an attempt on the other version. This is not a Mark II, but this was an attempt to make shielding for this ship. It didn't go very well, so this version of the ship was scrapped. I would have called this the B variant. Was scrapped for the anti-air standard, which is what became of it. The Meatloaf, the first TNT ship, you enter it by going underwater, and then into this little hatch, much like the Monarch. And yeah, surprisingly crammed interior, but you've got buttons for all of the ship systems, all fire charges in all directions except the front, because the front direction is relegated to the cannon. Standard light cannon. I think this is just a regular standard cannon, as boring as it is. Single shot TNT cannon, and you'll come to find that we have greatly surpassed this thing. Still in active service as target practice, say what you will. Also ought to mention, before I move on to the next ships, that this ship has been leased off to the other factions on the server. One of the first ships to have that happen to it as well. It performed decently well against Valhallan ships, even current day Valhallan ships, and one of the first factions it was leased off to was Mezbuk. Mezbuk used it as a light artillery ship against a Valhallan outpost, and that was erected in their region. They weren't particularly happy about it being there, so they opted to shell it from a distance. However, Valhalla managed to lure the ship close enough to the outpost's defences, and was successfully able to ground the ship and then destroy it. Bit of a shame for the first leased ship, but I think it did well enough. I mean, in Londivium service, I use this thing more as a frontline brawler, which you wouldn't really want for a ship that has fire problems that are difficult to put out, but it served its role. It was one of these ships that was able to get through the Phoenix's shielding systems, and exposed a pretty big flaw in the way Valhallans make their shielding systems, which was very, very beneficial for me. Not so much for Valhalla, obviously, but they would later figure out this issue and have since adapted to it. But again, that happened way, way, way later, and this ship was around to capitalize on that. So, good on it. Now, this is where the server lore starts to get a little bit weird, but if you've already subscribed to the idea of this server being completely and utterly out of whack, then this is the Sovereign. It is an alien ship. let me explain. So, earlier on in the history of the main server, I don't know if it was touched on in the video or not, a bunch of alien domes were built north of Londivium. As a result of this, Londivium decided to march a bunch of artillery units up to its north and shell the aliens until they surrendered. They then had the aliens work for them, and they used a lot of their technologies, specifically Endstone, to enhance their fighting machines. First one of that line was the Sovereign. Sovereign is an absolute powerhouse variant of the Monarch. It is bigger, it is stronger, it is more durable. I wouldn't say better, but it certainly looks a little bit sleeker compared to the Monarch. It is one of the most heavily armored ships in the entire server, in the entire game. This thing is incredibly hard to crack, to take down, as it has improved shielding compared to the Monarch, meaning that in spite of it having the same shielding breaks that the Monarch has, this was before Valhalla wisened up to shoot in between the gaps in the shielding. This thing was an absolute unit. And the only thing really holding it back was its weight. Now this thing was heavy, very heavy, and in spite of its weight it was also uniquely agile, but it also meant that it would sit quite low in the water. I got this one to sit quite high, luckily, in the water. There are versions of this that would sit so low in the water that it would cover the top row of guns, and that's not ideal at all. You need those above water to be able to hit the vital components of other ships, but this ship was heavy, if you hadn't figured that out yet. But yeah, everything that the Monarch does, this thing also does it. And I wouldn't say it does it better, but it certainly does them, and it certainly leaves an impression whenever this thing is deployed. This thing has been deployed around 5 or 6 times in total. Hasn't really seen too much action, but most of the action it has seen, it has come out on top. Exceptions have existed where it went up against a Valhallan Vindicator, which was their more reputable TNT-based ship, where it actually lost a fight against the Vindicator. The Vindicator was able to disable the countermeasure suite, which is the giant canopy on top of the ship, and damaged it enough that the helm was no longer working. It then attached itself to the front of the ship and towed it away, thus leading to its capture, which is absolutely unacceptable. Fortunately, Valhalla didn't opt to do anything with it, and would rather just keep it as a sort of trophy. And yeah, I'm glad that they did that instead of actually using it or building anything out of Endstone, as I see Endstone as to be a bit of a blemish against ship design. They are not the biggest fans of the aliens, which is a very Valhallan thing to be, but they also quite like the Sovereign in its design. It is a large ship. It has crew quarters in the lower half of its hull. Not that they are furnished, but hey, the crew is able to furnish them as they see fit. All important areas of the ship are easily accessible, so if any of the weapons are damaged, you can quickly go into those areas and patch them up if you need to. And all in all, this is a extremely reliable, albeit slightly impractical, ship. I think this ship exists more so for the statement of power that it brings, instead of the combat capability, because I believe it does have less guns than the Monarch does, meaning less firepower, and more defensive ability. More defensive, less attack. I still quite like it. Not as good as it could be, but hey, a lot of these ships are. Next of the Sovereign line of ships, we have this abomination. Goodness me, what happened to you? Poor thing. This is the carrier version of the Sovereign, which, well, I was doing some reading on some World War II history when I found out that America had commandeered some of its supply ships, I think, or cargo ships, and fixed a aircraft carrier mount to the top of them to then field as a quick, cheap aircraft carrier. Same idea went into this thing. It is a quick, cheap aircraft carrier mount that I can apply to the top of Sovereign class ships. Now, there are a lot more Sovereign class ships than you might think. I mean, they haven't seen much combat, but hey, their presence is a pretty good deterrent for a lot of Valhallan activity, unless a Vindicator is involved. But this thing flips that on its head by no longer making it a frontline ship. It is now a support ship that can carry, resupply, and field airships, aircraft, fighters, etc. It is mostly made to field these ships, and specifically the... I forgot what these things were called. They were the Pit Fighter Mark 1s. These were a replacement for another ship that I'll explain in the airships video, but they were a replacement for the Vampire Mark 1s. I'll talk about them later. They were fine. There's a lot of space on this thing for those types of ships, with the exception of the front, which fits two multi-role craft instead, which are loosely based on the Harrier, which is I find quite funny. All of these ships are attachable and detachable from the hull. Only some of them have landing gear, which means the multi-roles are able to comfortably land, and for the pit fighters, landing is quite the challenge. The same goes for the Washington Mark II, I believe this is. Can also land on here with difficulty, but the combination is made for it. This carrier can also mount medium, light to medium airships as well. So, if you saw the Enterprise-looking thing at the beginning of the video, that was a medium airship, a Pioneer-class airship that is capable of docking on the top of this ship and being resupplied. Of course, it takes up multiple slots of this ship, preventing other ships from landing or being docked. But it's capable. It's able to do that. I don't really have anything else to add. Crew quarters are the same. It still features all the same things that the previous version does. It just has a giant aircraft carrier mount and looks severely unhappy as a result. Now, to take us a little bit of a step back, even though it's a step forward, we have the shield. This thing looks Valhallan, and that is because it is it was built during a joint design operation with Valhalla. Valhalla wanted some cheap frontline ships, and we needed some extra resources. This was quite a while ago, I think, during what was it? During the time Londivium was under a lot of pressure from neighboring nations as it was trying to deforest a large area. So we had a lot of extra resources, but we needed some place to put those resources without the ire of other factions knowing where those resources went. The result were these two ships, the Shield and the Sword. The Shield was the actually successful variant. It was accepted by Valhalla, though used mostly for target practice, which is understandable. It's not particularly well armed or defended. But it is extremely cheap and easy to build, and easy to manufacture. Much like other Londivium ships, you enter this thing through the underside, and on the inside it is not as crammed as the other ships, but not exactly spacious either. One benefit that this ship has over all of the others is that it is incredibly modular. Various pirates on the boat server have completely covered this thing in planks, stone bricks, cobblestone, to make it more of a floating square instead of whatever it is now. And that has come with the unique effect where it is surprisingly resistant to TNT barrages from other ships, as it has got such a boxed frame. TNT has no place to really lock in as it would on the default hull. TNT could get stuck on here, detonate, and you'd have a huge hole in your hull. However, by completely boxing out all of the edges on this thing, TNT has no place to latch on and simply slides over the top or gets stopped and falls into the water, where its explosion does no harm to anyone. Surprisingly effective, this ship was able to take on various Valhallan patrols, and even capture a Valhallan ship for, for Londivium research. However, the ship would later be chased down and destroyed by a Valhallan dispatch, but it pulled through for the most part, and I think that's what needs to be recognized. A bit of an ill-fated ship, as it is mostly used for target practice by both Londivium and Valhalla. We attempted to lease it off to other factions, but no one really wants this thing beyond the independent pirates who occasionally show up, take a ship or two, and do things with them. And out of all the pirates we've seen, they have been most successful with this thing, and I think that says something to the design of this ship. Anyway, here we have the less successful sword. This thing is... it's not my best work. It is aesthetics over anything else. It is a little bit daft, though it does feature a TNT cannon, a vastly underpowered cannon, but the extra damage was politely asked for by Valhalla when they were considering this ship, though they ended up making their own variant, which wasn't called the... well, they made their own sword, but the less said about that sword, the better. Instead, they would end up making a variant of the Phoenix, which had a lot more TNT capability than this ship did, and their version of the sword combined. But this ship sits in the very weird middle ground of Londivium and Valhallan design, where a lot of ideas were coming together and a lot of them were being dropped for simply not working. An older version of this ship that wasn't saved had all of its fire charges in independent groups, meaning one lever for each row of fire charge dispensers, which wasn't great, because if you wanted to put out as much damage as you could, you'd have to flick one thing and then go to another and quickly juggle between the two of those, which wasn't very easy to do. So, on this version at least, that was simplified. There's one lever for an entire row of fire charge dispensers, which increased its damage significantly, but still left a lot to be desired. As a result, this ship was not very successful compared to the Shield. It was also a lot pricier to build, a lot more ornamental looking, and not very successful. Not many people wanted it. I didn't want it. Valhalla didn't want it. It sort of exists in this weird open area where you can buy one if you're an independent, but there are better options. Or you could just, get a cheaper ship and go steal a better option, which people have done. Moving on from the Sword and Shield, we have the Violation class. You might be thinking, oh, that's quite the name for this thing. And what even is it? Well, it's a submarine. A functional submarine, not just a boat that floats very low underwater. No, it is a proper submarine that can sail underwater. And why it's called the Violation class is because submarines are not allowed on the server. Yeah. I thought, hey, why don't I make a submarine anyway? And I made this thing. It is incredibly poor. It is not great. I don't really have anything positive to say about it. It was more so an experimental vehicle to see if I could make a submarine, but it is incapable of doing any damage to anything, because all weapons in this game are some sort of fire-based weaponry that can be shot up. Fire doesn't work underwater. This is a submarine, it goes underwater. You can see the problem. Naturally enterable through the underside, nothing else to say. Incredibly crammed, not very nice to walk around in. Takes a lot of design cues from the Monarch, that being segmented into three parts that are broken up via fire breaks. And because this thing looks identical front to back, on the inside I have identifiers to tell you which is the front and which is the back. This being the front and the back being there, which means, you know what, if you've got a ship that is required to tell you which side is the front and which is the back when you're running around on the inside because it looks identical at every single angle of the ship, maybe the ship's not designed very well, maybe it's not a good ship, and I've realized that, so this ship isn't used at all. Not even for spying, it's just not a good ship. Anyway, moving away from this abomination, we have... This isn't actually a ship, this is a command post. Again, this was made during a joint design program with Valhalla. It is what is known as the Commissar command post. Valhalla had a hand in naming this thing. I think you can figure that out. But yeah, this is a little command area, mobile command area, that can be placed anywhere throughout the combat area, can be moved, can be defended by itself, if only from air vehicles, and is usually escorted by an actual capable combat ship. It has a lot of seats around a table, which you'd be able to put a map on and have someone explain a tactic or strategy, and that is it. It is a function ship that does one thing, being an area close to an engagement zone where you can brief people on. There's 3 docking areas for ships, and that is it. It is not very complicated, not much else to say. And Valhalla, when they fielded this thing, removed the coloured edges on those, and that's understandable. That's my own little touch to it. And Valhalla has also changed their flag from white to black, meaning this thing is very old. And the version I have is even older. Valhalla has a much more up-to-date one that I do believe they still use, so there's that. Now, here's one hell of a ship. This is the first seafaring aircraft carrier. And I say seafaring to imply that there are flying aircraft carriers. Again, we'll get to those in the airships video. And ironically, the flying aircraft carrier, came first. This would be the second. But yeah, it's the first seafaring aircraft carrier. It is unreasonable. This thing was a lot larger than it needed to be, and as a result, very, very inefficient for its space. A lot of time and effort was wasted into trying to make this thing. Inside-wise, it's very, very sparse, very barren, and everything is difficult to get to because of how I've spaced the entire thing out. Not my finest vehicle. Does look very nice though, but yeah, it fields these fighters, that being the Interdictor. I believe this is an older version of the Interdictor, or is it? Yeah, this is an older version of the Interdictor. This being the aircraft that was developed at Area 50 before it was taken by Valhalla. We were able to extract with this ship still intact, and Valhalla would end up taking Area 50, and they would use some of the knowledge that they got from me leaving with this ship to make their own variant that would later be called the Stingray Mark II. If you know anything about the Stingray type of aircraft, you know that was a big deal in the server. Still, actually. Again, we'll cover this in a lot more detail in the airships video, but this is about the boats. And this ship is made of coal. Coal. This thing is incredibly flammable, but a weird quirk of coal blocks is that they don't burn up. They burn, and they spread fire, but they don't break, meaning this thing is impervious to most forms of fire charge damage, but it certainly catches fire, making this an incredibly awkward ship. But yeah, another quirk of it was that it was too big to comfortably be able to actually move anywhere. This thing, if you tried to move it, would cause the server to crash, so we just didn't use it. It works fine for the most part in single player, but yeah, it also fields like about six aircraft, which is insultingly low for an aircraft carrier of this size. So I took it back to the drawing board and made this thing, the AV4 carrier. This is a much more simplified version of that carrier. Same basic outline, except I've cut off all of the redundant features and spec'd it entirely for the AV4s, which are these things, which you saw in the previous carrier over there. These are the multi-role fighters. I've had these things in service for a very, very long time. They were present during the Battle of Area 50, but were designed before that battle specifically happened, and they were probably my second most common aircraft at the time, the first being the Vampire Mark I. Again, we'll cover the rest of those in more detail in the airships video, but this, just a general improvement over the previous one. All of the redundancy is gone. It is much easier to get to all of the docking clamps for the aircraft on this ship, as they are all within the same area instead of weirdly spaced out, blocked off, and other areas like that ship is. And it feels a lot more aircraft at a single time. It has around about 8 aircraft that you can have on this thing at any time, and has a crew capacity of around 10 people to operate at full efficiency, which is insane. We never had 10 people on the server at one time. Most of them have been on during sparse times. Most we've had on the server at a single time, I think, is around 6 or 7. But yeah, it is a fine ship. It is a support ship as well. It offers resupplies to other ships, even larger airships, when the front of the deck has been cleared of fighters. It is a unique ship, as in it has only seen a handful of engagements, and never sees frontline combat for obvious reasons. These things have been fielded a good number of times. Again, Battle of Area 50, Battle of the Binary Islands, which was interesting. I do believe it lost that fight as well, which is a bit of a shame. It was also strafed by a Valhallan, I believe it was either the Phoenix or the Sword or the Trident. One of those types of ships attacked this thing briefly and promptly left as it was pursued by a Sovereign. But yeah, it survived the attack against it and proceeded to retaliate against the Valhallan forces in that area by bombing campaigns with the multi-role ships. Not many of those multi-role ships aircraft would survive, and oh well, at least they're affordable. Now, here is another alien ship. This is the Eternal Infinity, shortened to Infinity because the Eternal just really isn't needed, and it certainly wasn't Eternal because this thing is terrible. I was testing out some new fire charge defense systems when I thought, hey, fences might be a really good idea for instead of windows, instead of glass. I chose fences instead. Problem being that this thing now has terrible visibility from the middle of the ship, which is quite kind of required when you're on a frontline combat ship to be able to see what's around you, see where your enemy is, and plan accordingly. This thing does none of that. This thing is absolutely atrocious, and as a result, this thing has been a result of the biggest losses in Endstone that we've had, because every single one of these ships that went down, Valhalla sneakily stole a piece of it. And there is a rule in the Londivium Doctrine, that naval doctrine, that no Endstone is to fall into enemy hands. This ship has single-handedly betrayed that several times over, and we don't use it for frontline combat anymore. It is, at best, a patrol ship for alien regions where they have structures, and we don't do anything with it. We don't want to do anything with it. It's poor. It doesn't do fighting very well. Most of its guns are underwater and thus ineffective against actual armor. Yeah, not a good ship. We don't have many nice things to say about it. It does, however, have AA guns, which it's a standout, I guess, but could be a lot better. Now, this is where the timeline of ships gets a little bit weird, as there is a ship way over there that I believe came before this thing, but I'm going to delay talking about that thing because I absolutely despise its very existence, but oh well, it has to be spoken about. But we're going to wait a bit. This is the tip of the Spear class of ships. This is part of a new standard of ship design that Londivium went through, as I realized that a lot of its ships were not necessarily up to scratch. They could do one thing, and they could do one thing well, but they couldn't do multiple things well. So I designed this line of ships to do multiple things very, very well. And they do. They do those things very well. This, the first one, the regular tip of the Spear class, this thing acts as both a frontline ship, an aircraft carrier, and an artillery ship, all packaged into one. And it does all of those things incredibly well, and I still actively use variants of this ship. It is massive. It even has a submarine dock, which would go unused because submarines are useless, but it has one because I was trying to make one. And yeah, I think that just goes to show that this was a very ambitious ship. A lot of ideas went into this thing, and only some of them would end up, you know, providing anything. That being the aircraft carrier section, and the sheer amount of firepower this thing can put out. Those two front cannons were a newly developed, specifically for this ship. They are called the Lightbringers, which means this ship is. When I was testing this thing against a Valhallan ships, he noted that this ship actually damaged a nearby aircraft, and these two massive cannons could be counted as anti-aircraft guns, and I think that's just magical. I think that's amazing. I'm very happy with this ship. Problem is that it's made of paper. This ship, for as cool as it is, has very little in the way of armor or any proper fire charge defenses, which is its Achilles heel, if you will, its biggest flaw. This thing gets caught on fire once, and the entire outer hull goes up in flames. The entire thing cooks. And there is very little to no way to actually put the fire out, because again, the fire is on the outside of the ship, and you are on the inside with very little ways of getting outside quickly. And that proved to be quite an issue. When this thing went up against its first fight, it was against the Valhallan Trident, which was an experimental Valhallan craft, which had 3 front-facing TNT cannons, all of which were pretty much useless. And this thing completely and utterly folded it in a matter of seconds with its greatly superior firepower. But in those few seconds, the Trident had fired off a volley of fire charges, which almost crippled this ship and almost killed it. Again, the lack of proper fire defenses that this ship has is a severe oversight that I made. But yeah. I didn't realize that even for the second version, and there's no difference between two versions here. The only difference is the addition of a anti-aircraft layout at the top here. Functionally, these two ships are identical. The only severely changed version is this one, which I think was, I don't remember the name of it, because all of these ships had different and unique names, with the original being the Tip of the Spear, the Anti-Air, and I think this one, don't remember the name of this one, but I know the next one, which is even more fire charge defenses, is called the Abomination. So this one here, the strange middle ship. So I went and checked my saves again, and this thing is called the Molten Lead. It's specifically this variant of the ship. The next one is indeed called the Abomination. The previous one is the Anti-Air and the Tip of the Spear. All of these new standards of ships have unique names, and they all sound pretty sick, not gonna lie. Valhalla also did a thing with upper standard ship designs. They didn't give them necessarily names as wild as these ones had. All of these new standard ships, which all look like some modern day frigates, if I'm gonna be honest, but yeah. Moving on, I realized that the sheer weight and size of these ships was impractical, so I made a slightly smaller version, which is the new standard low capacity ship, which it isn't low capacity. It still has a flight deck on it, and it ditches the submarine dock, as that just isn't needed. The side cannons they've properly been built into the hull, and what this allows is on a later version of the ship, this one here. This one is just, it's not as fielded as the previous ones. This thing exists as a platform for extra developments. And those extra developments come with this thing, which I believe was called the God of Iron. This thing is way over-designed. It has a shielding system, which, as I mentioned, the flushness of this cannon in the hull means that you can have the shielding system go over the TNT cannon and not affect the firing arc of the cannon, which the previous one had an issue with when I was designing it and putting a shield rig on it. This one suffers none of that problems. This is probably the most ultimate of fighting machines that I have for Navy combat, that is. It is very over-designed. The flight deck is incredibly vulnerable and sort of just an afterthought. This thing is a frontline ship, it is a backline ship, it does everything incredibly well. It's an artillery ship, anti-air, and it's a force to be reckoned with. And I have fielded quite the number of them, but I don't necessarily put them into frontline combat because they are a little bit clunky to move around. The other ships are surprisingly fast for their weight and size. This one is not. And that's funny to me because this thing is smaller than a lot of the other ships, but I'm not entirely sure why that is, but I'm not going to question it. It's a very capable ship for what it is, and from what it has done, it is proven its worth. Moving on, we have the Abomination. Where do I even begin with this thing? This thing. Oh God, I hate this thing so much. Right, this is the Meatloaf successor, and I feel wrong calling it the successor to the Meatloaf because it's not, but it's been called the Beef Chunk because it shares a very similar sort of principle to the Meatloaf. The Beef Chunk is a frontline brawler type ship with no sensibility to its design at all. There isn't even a way into this ship. You can go under, there's no way in, it entirely floats under there. There's no way in, you can't get in through the sides, you can't get in through the top, there is just no way. No consideration was made for the design of this ship. You go in there, you get this thing built around you, and then you get thrown in the direction of the enemy ships, and you are told to explode everything in every general direction to kill the enemy. And that's what it does. It works. I hate the fact that it works. It is so unbelievably effective at what it was supposed to do that it slaughtered an entire fleet of, like, up-to-date Valhallan ships, and none of them could stop it. The only reason it stopped and ultimately failed at its job was because it blew itself up. In a fleet environment, in a combat fleet environment, this thing is most dangerous to itself. Nothing else, was able to fight this thing and win. The problem was with the Meatloaf was flammable. You can put the fire out easily. This thing will only burn for a few seconds before you have easy access to it and can put it out. It works, and I hate it. I hate that it works. I could put a much more I could make a much more sophisticated version of this ship, and I'd be very happy with it, but I haven't. There is no better version of this thing. I don't like it. It just is. It's a mistake, and yet it outperformed everything else. It's the butt of a joke, but what joke that is? The joke is that it worked. Ugh, God. Valhalla hates it. I hate it. Mezbuck loves it for some reason, and I don't know why. So, moving away from this thing, we have this thing. Now, I don't actually hate this thing as much as I hate that, but, this is the Fallen Angel class of ship. And the reason it's called that is because it was once a line of airships called the Angel. And the Angel was one of the earlier, proper tanky, effective ships. But it started to underperform for some reason, and that entire reason was it was outdated. And I refused to believe that it was outdated for a very long time. I held on to that hope that I would be able to use this thing. I'd be able to give it new life, to give it new purpose. And ultimately I was wrong. And it got desperate enough that I turned it... I pulled it from grace. I turned it into a boat. Gave it, some armor, made it float, and yeah. I'm not proud of it. It's specifically based off of the Angel Mark II. The Mark I Angel is another can of worms that, again, we'll get into when we reach the airships video. But again, this thing is messy, crammed. I don't like this thing. I used to like this thing, but looking at making this ship and then looking at it made me realize that I need to stop. I need to let this ship die. I need to let it become obsolete. and I need to move on. I need to make better ships that aren't this thing. And so I did, but not after one final attempt to make this ship, this claustrophobic as hell ship, relevant. And that was removing the front TNT cannon. Now, ultimately, the front TNT cannon on this ship as well, and on the Angel, was not necessarily to be used. It was more of a last resort. Everything that this ship would do would be broadsiding. The broadside cannons were the actually threatening aspect of this ship, and they do work. They did work. Even on this ship, they work. They do considerable damage, but they shoot a little too low into the water that they're not able to get over most ship defenses. And a lot of the time when this thing fires, it goes helplessly into the water unless you're the perfect distance away, which is very difficult to calculate in the heat of a fight. As a result, these ships didn't perform very well. But this one, where you took out the front gun, reinforced the top of the ship, give it a lot more armor, make it a lot more fire resistant, still didn't perform very well. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back. This got me to drop the Angel as it was from current service. And whilst I still have these boat-type battleships, the Fallen Angels, around, they're not properly in service. They are an auxiliary ship, a backup. I don't want to field these things anymore, and if I don't have to, I won't. Very few of them exist. I don't intend to actively produce these things anymore. There is a way in through the top, which is present on the airship version as well. Except the airship version has a top area, a secondary hull area, which this one also has, but you need to climb up these stairs on the sides instead of the ladder. On the regular one, you could get there from the ladder, but this is a different ship. These two are shells of their former selves. And looking at them makes me sad, but it was a necessary thing that I needed to do, because if I kept using these ships, I would have fallen behind greatly in terms of the technological development that Valhalla and I have been racing towards since the server began. This thing was holding me back, and dropping it was the only real move. Bit of a shame, though. They are on the independence market now. You can get them if you're a developing nation. You can have them leased to you, the airship variant as well. And that's that. The Mark IIs, however, still in service. Not active service, but they are there. Again, I don't really have many things to say about this thing. Nice things, that is. It's clunky, it's old, and it did its part. Did it do it well? That's debatable. But it certainly did its part. Next, we have the Unyielding Soul. This is not my ship. This is a Valhallan ship, and this was the ship that fought the Monarch during the first Battle of the Boneyard. This is one of the older ships in the server, and yeah, it is Valhalla's attempt to copy the Monarch without knowing what the Monarch was capable of, though they did reasonably do a lot of the same things that the Monarch did. The original Unyielding Soul had a shielding system, much like the Monarch. Unfortunately, it was plagued by a lack of understanding on how the shielding system properly worked, and as a result, the shielding system did little less than protect it. This version of the Unyielding Soul is a Lundivium attempt to recreate the ship out of the wreckage. The wreckage is public, anyone can have it, copies of it, but this was my attempt at recreating it. I don't like it, I'm gonna be honest with you. I like the Unyielding Soul. It's a fantastic little ship, even for, being a copy of the... I wouldn't call it a copy. Inspired, most definitely, but it was... This thing does not do its former glory any favors. It is a bit messy. It is open top. I believe there is supposed to be a roof, but for some reason this version just doesn't have that included. It has very complicated fire charge anti-air gun down the middle here, with redstone on the sides for the shielding system, which is ineffective, not a good shielding system. But it does work. Alternatively, there's the... Not alternatively, but Another flaw of this thing is I don't believe I did the interior correctly. It's a lot lower than the side armor is, so if you want to see out of the ship, you have to jump, which is not ideal. But this thing is a bit of a mess. I'm not happy with how I attempted to reconstruct this ship, but it does exist. And again, this one is on the civilian market because no one really has any faith in it. This recreation, that is. The Unyielding Soul itself varies a lot. Some people get it on the civilian market, some people get reconstructions of it, but you'll never get a completed Unyielding Soul because the wreckage hasn't. Well, the wreckage is the only public thing beyond what people make of this. Maybe I should have built the wreckage for comparison, but there's not a lot left. There is at most the 4 pillars of this ship, and no roof, as the entire thing had burnt off during the Battle of the Boneyard. But yeah, I wasn't happy with this thing. Valhalla wasn't happy with this thing, and I made it a must to improve that. So what I did was I made this thing, this beast of unholy power, this machine that... This is the Unyielding Revenant. It's a step up from Soul. I had an idea one day that fire charges would be the way forward, and using command blocks, we would be able to summon Ghast fireballs and use those as cannonballs instead, which this ship does. This thing is absurdly powerful, because it has all directional attack capability. You can summon a fireball, punch it, and it'll just go where you want it to go. And nothing can really stop it. If you're getting shot at by fire charges, and they hit the fireballs that you spawn, the fireballs will go in the direction that they're being shot from, meaning if you shoot at it, you'll direct fireballs at yourself. This thing shields itself with fireballs that explode. Nothing can really challenge it. And to make things even worse, it has another system here made again out of another command block, which instantly turns fire to air on the push of a button. If this thing catches fire at any point, you just press a button and you are instantly extinguished. And you can go back to summoning a fireball, punching it, and whatever you're looking at is just unmade. Absurdly powerful. We don't use this thing because it's that powerful. This is a sort of ship that you'll be playing on the server and you'll just happen across, completely unattended, completely uninhabited, and you might think, oh, I should mess around with this thing, until the gods themselves come down and tell you, no one is allowed to touch this thing, for obvious reasons. It is a monument to what goes wrong when you don't plan things ahead, when you think just because I can. You do things because you can, not because you should, and you get this thing. I love this thing. Valhalla is terrified of this thing, and I am as well. We have mutually agreed this ship, it exists, no one's allowed to touch it. And thus it sits somewhere near Mezbuk, which should be a problem, but Mezbuk has also seen how this thing works, and also refuses to touch it. So yeah. I do quite like how this thing looks, though. Again, this thing was one of those aesthetics over function, because did it need to be anything else? Its function is the push of a button, and you win. So, actual design was thrown out the window in terms of it just being, and I quite like that. It looks very cool. It looks very different to all of the other ships, and looks very aggressive as well with its sort of rib cage design, which will be interesting for the next ship. Anyway, that being said, we have the ribcage. Now this, I had a dream about this ship, alright? I woke up one night and I was like, imagine if we dug up some, like, dinosaur bones and we, like, build a battleship around them. That'd be sick as hell. So I did that. The ribcage. It is, I went and found a Minecraft fossil of a ribcage, and I built a battleship around it. That is it. It is one of the more effective variants. This thing was built after the failure of the Fallen Angels. Was built with the idea of, we can have smaller ships that hit harder, cheaper to make. I would say cheaper to make, but it's made of a rib cage. That's not cheap. But a few of these were fielded because somehow we were able to do that, and it was effective. Weak, but it was effective. This thing would burn quite easily, and a lot of its internals would get damaged as a result, meaning it couldn't stay in combat for very long. But when it was in combat, it was effective. It had a slightly more up-to-date cannon than most of the other previous ships got. I think it is the same as the Fallen Angels, just with a slightly longer barrel and a TNT burst grouping, so that when this thing fires, it puts out a lot more TNT than you'd think it would do. It does a lot more damage, hits a lot harder. Very cool ship. Didn't get used too much, but again, when it was used, it was very cool. I intended this thing to be the new frontline ship, but oversights with the construction material. Yeah, not the smartest thing I've done, but hey, we got this thing, and this thing would be the first in a very, very frightening line of ships. Believe me, this thing, only terrible things came from this ship, and it's kind of amazing that this I can equate this thing to the start of a lot of, well, you'll see. Now, before I get on to the newer ships, some context. On the boats server, Valhalla ended up building a heavy railgun on an island within range of my base of operations. And with that, he began shelling my base. As a result of that, I hastily threw together my own railgun on my base, and used it to counter-snipe his railgun, successfully. However, this resulted in a bit of a race. That race to see who could put a heavy railgun on a battleship first. I succeeded in this, but it was close. Not that Valhalla has an equivalent, but, well, they do, but it's outdated. This one isn't. The result of this is, we have what are called railgun carriers, which this thing, it resulted in the mind that went behind this thing, the thinking that created the ribcage, ended up creating these railgun carriers. And I call them carriers not because they carry aircraft, because the railguns themselves are designed to be ground stationary weapons, and I've put them on a boat. But yeah, so what we have here is the Lance railgun carrier, heavy railgun carrier, which you'll notice very quickly that there's only heavy railguns. You have heavy railguns, and then you have heavier railguns. They only go up, they don't go down. But the Lance is a cheap, inexpensive ship with a shield rig and a heavy railgun. And it uses a lot of the developments from the Monarch Mark IV, i.e. the fully automatic cannons and all, or what is it, FCGs in all directions. But its defining feature, hence its name, the railgun carrier, is the heavy railgun. This thing is insane. This is probably one of the more frightening ships that I have built, and its package, specifically this ship, is small enough for it to be put in the same places that you'd be able to fit a Monarch or even a ribcage. Yet it's defended and powerful enough to square up with anything and win. This thing and the other ships of the line squared up against a heavily defended island and sunk the island. They sunk the island. But yeah, and this one is the weakest. We follow that up with the next one, the weird middle one. Now, this ship is called the Halberd, the NS Halberd, which is new standard. All of the newer standard ships have the NS prefix. The Halberd has an even heavier railgun instead of the one that the Lance has. And now this is the scary one. This is your big bad kills everything railgun that has become quite a topic of conversation in the server because of how absurdly powerful it is. This thing is scary. One of them is scary, but when these things were fielded, there were 3 of them. not this one, but three line of ships, this trio of unrivaled destruction, Valhalla had to deal with this, and they were only able to confidently deal with two, that being the Lance and the Halberd. Halberd is chunkier, it has a very, very vaguely monarch-shaped design, with a heavy railgun in place of its face. It has an interior which is extremely armoured, and it is a massive fire break system right down the middle, designed obviously to prevent the whole ship from burning up if it so gets, ignited. However, it also features a shielding system on top to make that just not a very easy thing to accomplish. This thing is scary. This is probably one of the effective one. But it wasn't meant to be, because as good as this thing is, it's an artillery ship. And I made the mistake of using this thing like a frontline ship. And as a result, I lost this ship. But I also lost the railgun that went in its face, which I'm happy for, because if I didn't, Valhalla would have it, and I can't have that. Whilst this thing would not be fielded, I would not be using this thing for combat. It was there for its experimental usage, and it succeeded. I will probably be using the Lance a lot more than this thing. We move on to the Sarissa. This one is your nightmare machine. This is the ship that sunk the island. This is the ship that completely and utterly annihilated the little base that Valhalla had on that side of the server. And it is five heavy railguns, proper full-scale heavy railguns, like on the front of this one, but with the idea that it'll be broadsiding things. This thing can brawl with ships. This thing can fight at long range and at close range and come out on top at both scenarios. Has a shielding system to make, actually hurting it very, very difficult, with very few shielding blind spots to make this thing just a bit of a nightmare. But its problem, again, is that I had very little faith in it. This one, unlike the last two, is overbuilt, and I did this because I didn't believe it would be good enough to fulfill its role. I thought, hey, this thing is going to get shot up, completely destroyed, and that'd be a waste of technology, and I'm never going to come back to using this stuff again because it's all gone, burnt, and in the middle of the ocean. And we're going to be moving on to different ships as a result, and this whole thing would end up being forgotten. So, as a result, I up-armored the ever-loving hell out of this thing. I wouldn't consider this fair. I am very against doing this, even though I did it myself, and I won't make a ship like this again. This is going to be the only one of its type that is this armored. And, it did its job. It did its job so unbelievably well that it sunk the island. There was no Valhallan outpost, there was no island after this thing had finished its barrage. It was so effective that it smoked a Valhallan ship at a neighboring island. Completely accidentally. I don't really know how to feel about this ship. I think I've learnt the necessary lessons I have to from this ship. Where it sits on the server, it's much like the Unyielding Revenant, where it sits on the server and no one is allowed to touch it. No one's allowed to even approach it, really. It's an abomination. It's a frightening abomination, but lessons were learned. And I have put those lessons towards another ship. A much more fair, a much more sensible ship. That is still an absolute beast. An absolute monster. But this ship, the Sarissa, will never be used again. It was used once, and I intend to keep it like that. If Valhalla wants to salvage this ship and turn it into one of their battle machines, they can. I will fight them over it, but they're more than welcome to make the attempt. I will allow that. But good lord, this thing was a mistake. And I'm realizing that myself, the amount of damage this thing does, the collateral. I shot some of my own ships with this thing accidentally. It is effective. It is a little too effective. But it worked. And that's the scary part. It worked. Would I be reluctant to use anything else if I'm not completely and utterly assured of its, effectiveness. Would I want to use anything else? Well, the answer is yes, because I made the Pike, NS Pike. It is strictly broadsider instead of a front-facing gun. It is just the side guns. It's got a slightly slimmer profile than the Sarissa, but not by much. It's still a chunky boy compared to the previous one, but it's not as long. I don't know how I feel about that, but hey, it does work. It is cheaper. It is less armored. Might not look like it, but it is. The only thing that is as armored as the Sarissa is the middle bit, the frame. That is a durable frame. It can take hits. It can also deal a lot of damage, and I believe it also has a shielding system. Again, this shielding system is also its weakest link, because unlike two previous, it is not as good as I would like it to be. But it does its job. Again, all of these ships do their jobs, some of them better than others, and some of them are cheap enough to do them that we don't have to worry about the block material cost that goes into them. This is one of them, where the block material cost is a lot more valid than the previous one. It's still insane, it's still probably unreasonable, but it's an affordable unreasonable this time. And that is a difference between this one and the other one, is that this I will be fielding. I will be fielding this one not too often, but it will see combat, it will see fights. Because at the moment, this ship here, this is the most green ship. This one has not seen any combat, not done any harm, and all I can say is good things about it until I fight one day with it and have all of its glaring weaknesses laid bare. But I have some time to think. This is the ultimate culmination of all of the ships that I've built until that comes back and bites me in the arse. But yeah, that is my extremely long line of ships throughout the 6 or 7 years. The boat server has been alongside the main server. I'll be honest, I probably enjoy the boat server a little more than the main server, especially after a certain issue, which removed about a year's worth of progress on the main server. That was rough, but we're working through that. We've simply just added it to the lore, said it was an event, and we're working through it. Some developments on the main server are being made. We're recovering what we've lost, and it's fine. A boat server is just one of those kind of games that'll continue to develop. I don't think you can really kill this version of Minecraft. It is so unlike anything else I've played recently. Turned Minecraft, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, turned Minecraft into a political unrest simulator. Minecraft is my favorite political unrest simulator, and I don't think it gets better than that. There are also some supply ships that we have. These two big things here, the freighters. They are civilian ships. What can I say? They carry a lot of stuff wherever the hell you need them, and they've got in-universe company names on the side of those, which are there as a little bit of a gag. I don't think any of them are too serious, with the exception of one of them. We also have this. I'm going to mention this airship here, which I shouldn't do, but I'm going to. This being the first ever ships. I built these things when I was like 14 or 15, which was a very long time ago, and they've, if you will, sort of ignited the match that eventually became the boat server. And we have all of these, which is ironic. The airships started the boat server, but it is what it is. I have a lot of ships. I have quite the line of ships. And all of them have their own unique story, why they exist, how they exist, and what caused them to do what they do, and how effective they are at what they do. A lot of them have Valhallan counterparts as well. Valhalla is very similar. They started off very similar in terms of their shipbuilding, ship design, with the exception that they went more towards larger, more durable ships that can put out an equal amount of damage, and I have spec'd towards ships that are less defended that put out more damage. Result of this is that a lot of my ships are very high risk, high reward, and Valhalla's ships are less risk with the same reward. Makes it a bit difficult, because fighting Valhallan ships is not an easy thing to do. They are very well armored, and they put out a lot of pain very quickly. I did mention a few of them throughout this video. The Phoenix, the Vindicator, probably Valhalla's two greatest ships, if I'm being honest. I mean, I have Londivium has its own Phoenix, which is not included in this list because at no point was it meant to be used. It was only made as a what if you will, if Londivium made their own Phoenix. As a result of that, it sort of looks like a very, very elongated Monarch. But well, that is that at the end of the day. I have used some of Valhalla's ships as well. I've used the Phoenix, the Unyielding Soul, as you've already seen. I could point out a lot of the flaws and benefits that these ships have. We've been using them for so long. The Phoenix being one of Valhalla's oldest ships, alongside the Unyielding Soul, and the Vindicator, whilst also being old, is a lot more recent when compared to the other two. But yeah. A lot of these ships, especially the earlier ships, were built to fight their direct counterparts. The Monarch was countered by the Vindicator, and the Vindicator was countered by the Meatloaf, but the Meatloaf would end up being beat by the Vindicator, because the Vindicator was just that much better designed. Ironically, though, the Shield would later go on to beat the Vindicator when it was operated by pirates in quite the hilarious battle. But, yeah, it all just continues as is, and where we are at the moment. Some more ships have been built, but most of them are airships, and I will be saving them for the airships video. I do have two Valhallan ships there. They're aircraft, their most common aircraft, the Stingray. But, yeah, that is that. This has been the Londivium boats video. I don't know if there will be a Valhallan one. I doubt there will be. Maybe I could ask Joe for all of his schematics, but I doubt he'll do that. People like to keep their secrets, and I've certainly kept mine even during this video. But yeah. That concludes the brief description I've given of all of these ships, and I wouldn't exactly call them brief, but they are what they are. I've got a lot of loves for these things. I mean, I've been building them, using them for so many years. And I can say that because it really has been that many years. And, I probably... being completely honest, this server got me through a lot of hard times. I'm quite happy with that, honestly. I think it was probably a more productive thing than to do anything else. And yeah. And it all started with that one Enterprise-looking airship at the beginning, which I've gone ahead and named the Pioneer Mark 1. There is a Mark 2 version of it, and that's the much more common one. The Mark 1 is sort of it's there as a bit of a monument, if you will. I don't intend to use it in combat, though it has a combat variant, but again, it won't be used. The Mark 2 is the much more, obviously, frontline vehicle, does its things, but I'll save the actual information for the airships video. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy, you can I'm not gonna do the typical YouTuber out thing. You know how this channel is by now. I can already hear the I can already hear the music. What's it called? It's the